I am so excited to talk with you today. And so thanks for taking time. Matt, first off, you are a member in the American Legion, right?
Yep. Yep. Remember at the Department of Maine, Topsom Post 202 in Topsom, Maine.
Perfect. I got to know you through the American Legion College. And so got to be a facilitator with you for 2 years, and I'm going to miss you next year. So, um,
You guys will be fine.
that's what you say. We'll see how it goes. When we were there, we have been talking about legacy, and you have some really, really interesting ways or of perspectives of looking at legacy. And I'm like, we need to really record this because we belong to the American Legion, 105 years old now. And I know when I was in my 20s and 30s, legacy wasn't something that I thought of, right? Developmentally, it's a thing that we start to comprehend. But it's something that goes with us throughout our whole life, and then it morphs and it changes. And then when you get into your twilight years, it's really usually when people start thinking about legacy. But can you share a little bit of what you've been taught, what you share about legacy?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think you're right on there. Like we don't think about it when we're younger or whatever else, or we don't think about the decisions or the people or the interactions that we have today and how it's going to affect us long term, right? Like we're more living in the moment. And as you kind of go through and start realizing probably how people have had an impact on you or haven't had an impact on you, positive or negative, then maybe you start to become a little bit more aware of or understand of that you have that same impact on other people. And then I think once you kind of get conscious of that a little bit, then you start maybe thinking a little bit larger or even more globally or whatever about, okay, how do I want to, live my life? How do I want to be remembered? How, or do I even care? Right. And I think that's
Right.
different for everybody. But then understanding and having a little bit more about it just factors into some of your decision making. I think as you go through life to say, how does it align, and then how you see yourself as a person, and how that either align or doesn't align with how you want to be seen or what you want to be remembered as, or those kind of things. And you either adapt
Yeah.
or modify, or you don't, and then it becomes
Right.
what it becomes through those things. But
Yeah.
I think about it more towards as like the organization
Mm-hmm.
standpoint is, there's a bit of a legacy that's left to us, and that's less individual and more about,
Right.
am I carrying on what was left to me, and am I leaving it better than I
Right.
found it, right? And am I, passing on all the cool things that were passed to me onto the next group, set those
Right.
stories and those people sometimes, I talk a lot about some of the people that have been my mentors that have since passed, right? And we keep their names alive here in the Department of Maine and other places by telling their stories and teaching other people the lessons that they taught us,
Mm-hmm.
so that there's names and stories and legacies of people here in Maine that I know really well, and I tell other people about that I've never met, right? And in that way we kind of keep them alive within our organization as well.
Yeah, you brought up 2 points. I'm taking notes. I'm taking notes, Matt. Um, Legacy is your impact that you have on others.
I think so, from my perspective.
And one of the things that hit me when I was talking to my daughters, one's 21 and the other one's 23, is they brought up this whole concept of that social media piece, where your legacy is what you leave, like the pictures, the comments, everything that you do is now recorded. And so people can get a picture of who you are, the impact that you're having upon them. So what my 21-year-old was saying is that she always has to put her best face forward. You're always having to, and then the stress of that. And I know this ties into the legacy
Mhm.
piece very directly, but it's different, I think, for generations. I didn't have a record of my stupidity,
Me neither.
right?
Thank goodness.
Right? Like, friends might make up stories, but I can refute it because there's no pictures,
That's right. There's no
Okay.
proof, right? Yeah, that never
Right.
happened like that. It's fine.
Right.
No, I think that's a good point. I think it's different, but I think it also goes back to on how you think of legacy. If you think his legacy as physical stuff or as emotional or remembrances, and I think that's where I differ a little bit, right? Like
Yeah.
you can have like, great, you had a memorial built to your name, but if no one ever sees it and it never has any impact, what does it matter? If you have no memorial, but you have hundreds of people out there that are changing or living their life influenced by some way, shape that you deliver to them, like that's way more impactful and longer lasting. Because if your stories and your lessons and things like that are passed on from generation to generation, those will last forever. Even a memorial, or even at some point pictures and all that kind of stuff fade away. Or I laugh because just as technology changes and time changes, we look back probably on Polaroids from our youth and say like, oh, how outdated is that? And I can only imagine what kids today are going to look at some of the things they're using today and look back at those pictures like, oh, those are so outdated and they weren't even real. And I think that's the other thing is that, I while there's always that I got to put my best foot forward, kind of, I'll say anxiety without our saying society right now, that's not a great thing. I think the other side of that too is I think so much of that is like put forward personas that I think also people realize is not real. Right. So like, I think at some point we'll get to a point where just like we joke about, well, it was a story from a friend that's now embellished. Well, that never happened that way. I think at some point, even the social media and stuff that's historically there, you'd be like, well, that was, AI generated, fake, doctored, whatever. I think you have the same kind of excuses down the road as we have today in a different way. I just don't think we realize them yet, to the point where it does cause that stress and anxiety that, hey, this stuff lives online forever and I'm never going to be able to escape this potential thing and this potential view. And I think over time, there's always a way out of it, or a way to overcome it over time.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned, like the memorials or the statues and the legacy, and then the social media piece really is the best face forward all the time, the filters. But the legacy, for all of us, entails the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And we tend to want to remember the good, right? But some of us remember the tragedies and the sufferings, and they form who we are. And then what do you do with what you've been given? Because we all want to do better.
Yeah. And sometimes the negative things are like, are what you learn from, right? So some of those negative things are the stories that you're sharing, right? And hey, don't make the same mistake I did, right? Or, learn from what I'm doing. Or when you see the situation, here's a better way to handle it than how I handle it, because the outcome wasn't ideal. So there's always those kind of things that can be learned and pushed through and go through even from the negative stuff. So it's one of those, growth opportunities, or however you want to look at it. Like, no one's perfect. We're all going to screw up. It's just how we deal with it, how we learn from it, and how we take it forward. And again, we learn so much more from our failures than we do from our perceived successes. My favorite line there is always the golf one, is Bobby Jones saying, I never learned anything from a tournament I won. Right? Like, you learn from the failures and you learn from the mistakes, so that you can be better going forward, hopefully.
If we could jump into community legacy, because we're part of the American Legion, and I've read some of the history of people that have gone before us, and then just being an American and the history that has been left to us, and that concept of community legacy piece, and then what do we do with it, and how do we integrate it in, because it gets to the character of individuals. Because I don't know if you like, evil is a word that I would associate with some bad character, like things that harm people. I mean, that can be part of your legacy. Is that?
No, absolutely. Yeah, you could be that example of what never to do, right? I never want to be like that people. And we joke around, people like, who do you learn from? Or we all have had different leaders or different managers or different bosses or whatever else in life. And sometimes you learn a lot from the ones that were terrible. And you learn that, and whenever I have the opportunity to be in a leadership position, I never want to be like that person. And that can have an impact on you as well. So you learn from that and those kind of stories, and that's maybe more infamy than it is legacy, right? Like the infamous this, that you never want to be, but it's always there in the background as a cautionary tale to how not to be. But then you also have those ones, to your point, throughout our history, in our country and in our organization, that you hold up that, this person personified the values, the beliefs, the actions that make our country the place that it is, our organization what it is, and that they're then lessons to be copied and mimicked, and to live in a different way in a different time, holding true to those same kind of core beliefs or core values that we think are important, or need to be sustained within our organization and our country.
Yeah, like, do we remember the values, or do we remember like the facts? Or is there a both and, or is it just one or the other?
So I think it depends on the person too, right? I think that's where it goes back to, like, some people are good at, hey, I'm memorizing the facts and this date and that this was the contribution, or maybe that's more important to them. Like for me, I always remember the stories. Like I'll never remember the date or the whatever else, but I'll remember the story of it, and kind of that kind of thing, and how that story maybe embodied, something that I wanted to mirror, or that I wanted to aspire to from that perspective. And the story and the actions of the story were always kind of more important than some of the little facts and details and things like that.
Yeah. When you're thinking about military service and legacy, I've spoken with a lot of, World War II vets, Korean vets. I can't remember if I spoke with a World War I vet. I think I have. But legacy, aligning your values with the mission, and feeling if it was true to what you're invested in. There's something about legacy and investment of what you're doing and how it's going to impact others.
No, absolutely. And I think if you go back further, right, like, World War One, I mean, everyone thought they were going to fight the war to end all wars, right? Like that's a noble purpose, and hey, this is what we're doing. Even in World War II, right, it was kind of to stop the fascist march across all of the world, right? And like those kind of things, are things that you could really kind of pull together and bond and understand, the existential threat that you are actually contributing to beating bad. I think that's become probably less and less as we've gone forward, at least from a military service standpoint. There's usually something there, but as it changes over time, right? Like even with World War One, it wasn't the war to end all wars, right?
No.
Like, and so does that diminish it at all? No, it changes the legacy and narrative, but it still doesn't change what people believed or why they were doing it in the moment. And I would even take it as far as, going forward today, I would say, I think the fall of Afghanistan changed people's perspectives of how they might have felt about the global war on terrorism. I think a lot of people maybe always kind of felt a little bit like that Iraq was a little bit more of a quagmire, and Afghanistan was the one that, and then so when all that happened, I think 20 years later, from the start of it, the way it ended, I think in the moment for people, maybe took away a little bit of what they thought they were fighting for there during different people. It doesn't change what you thought you were doing and why you were doing and what drove you, or those kind of things, or what your hope or intent was. But sometimes the reality 20, 50, 30 years later, whatever else, doesn't end up being what you were hopeful for it was when you went. And I think Vietnam similarly, like, again, you think about that, and then the same thing there, how that ended and how that kind of left a bad taste, I think, for a lot of people, as well, as we didn't necessarily accomplish what we were intending to do, or how we talked about it, or why people went, and what they thought they were fighting for at the time. And that's a tough situation as well.
It is, because you got your individual legacy, and then you have your country's legacy, and then you have your unit's legacy. And so you have layers of legacy. And I think the individual legacy piece is kind of the piece that will help people survive beyond the overall piece. Vietnam, and then the social media aspect of now you have that legacy. And then it's changed over time too. But what I've always heard from Vietnam vets is their individual part of that communal action is what helped them continue to move forward.
No, I would agree. I think for a lot of us and a lot of different things, where no matter how you felt or how you felt it while you were there, or whatever it is, you had
Mhm.
those proud moments. You have that legacy of how you impacted other people, and how you had your brothers and sisters back wherever you were, right? And that's where,
Yeah.
no matter what else is going on in those kind of things, it usually, I think, in the military service ends up boiling down to your closest knit community. The person to your
Mhm.
right, to your left, those kind of things. That's where it really boils down to in the moment. And those are the things that are probably, the most, I'll say, emotionally impactful or legacy impactful. Like, there's people that are going to never forget, you know, how you treated them, what you did for them, or what you did together, or all those kind of things, even if history decides to forget them because they no longer like it, right? Like, those things will still
Mhm.
stick around for the people that did it, and the people that were in there together, and know about it and understand it the best.
Yeah. When we were at college, you had said something about when you're talking with individuals, remember, your legacy is how you're going to be remembered. I'm, I don't think that's how you said it because you said it really cool. I was like, oh yeah, that's a cool way to say that.
No, I joke. It's been part of the transition, I think, too. I think, with the Legion and things like that, like, we had a bit of a gap there from generational people as leaderships and stuff like that, and then trying to
Mhm.
get people to understand, like, how do you let go and how is it going to be different, and sometimes there's such an age gap there that it's harder to hand off because it's not going to be done the exact same way that was always done, and so it
Right.
goes back to how do you bring somebody else along to deliver the same intent in a way that's good for them, and you teach them the teachings and the basics and the understanding of that, and it kind of goes back to, like, you know if you, by holding on to anything, when you go, it goes, but by
Right.
passing it on and delivering that goes on, like, that's how you live forever within an organization, as you pass that
Mhm.
on to the next person, and that person passes your story, your name, on to the next person, and so on and so, so you can kind of live forever within an organization, potentially, through the other people, whether that's
Right.
within your post, whether that's in with your department, or for some folks even nationally, that will be long remembered, for different impacts and things they've had, and how they've delivered and taught different people along the way. There's some people that are going to be known for certain, like I said, acts or memorials or
Mhm.
big things, and then there's other people that are going to be known and in a more, I'll say, emotional, and from my perspective, more impactful way, because of how many people today, still do things or decide to do things based on their influence passed on through different generations. And so, like, that's how
Yeah.
you keep people's names alive, and you keep them alive within your organization by saying their name and telling their story. And most of the time that happens
Yeah.
because they've made some kind of really emotional connection, and impact on somebody else's life, where they feel like they need to tell it and pass it on and repeat it because it was super helpful and drove them and the organization forward.
Yeah, thank you, because I know you said it way better than I did. And while you're talking, I'm thinking the legacy piece. We tend to navigate towards the pronounced individuals that
Hmm.
impacted us positively or negatively. But then there's the legacy of the insiders that we might not necessarily speak their name, but they influence us quietly.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm just like, can you stay alive and within that if you're unless does your name have to be pronounced, right? Like if you're an introvert and you're just behind the scenes mentoring or coaching quietly, is that legacy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, and again, most of that, when I say this, like, most of it isn't anybody saying their own name, right?
Mhm.
It's living on through others because of the impact you've had for that. And some of those people that are the
Yeah.
most impactful are the ones that aren't out front, that are spending the
Yeah.
time behind the scenes, and kind of steering you or directing you, or
Mhm.
giving you little bits of information or little bits of background to help you be successful in whatever you want to go do. And those are the people that you kind of really remember. There's other people that are very out
Yeah.
front and very loud and will be proponents for you that you'll remember as well. But
Right.
there's always those people that are behind, you know, silently supporting and making sure that stuff where, that,
Mhm.
not everybody would have known them, but their names and their stories can live forward and hopefully inspire other people that might be introverts to do a similar thing and know that they can still be involved and they can still have an impact, even if they don't like to be in front of the podium, right? Or they don't
Right.
like to be in front of big crowds or talk to everybody. Like you can have a really significant impact just by being you and working with other people who identify that way and showing them that you can still have an impact in different ways.
Yeah. I was when I was a hospice chaplain. One of the most impactful stories was an individual that he lived his life really for himself, and he was really good at he was a sports guy, loved sports, excelled in sports, and he had tons of awards, and he was recognized publicly. But when he's on his last few weeks of living, and his family are there, and everything is focused in on him recounting his stories, and the loss that you could feel, you could cut it with a knife in that room, because he missed all the other people while he pursued a life of developing himself for his own self-gratification.
Mm.
It was a really sad, sad time for the family, but not for him, because he had all the awards. And I think when we're thinking about the legacy piece, I mean, for him, his legacy is he's going to go down in infamy. But for the rest of us, right, that lived their lives with him as kids, all those missed moments. And it just made me connect the fact that legacy is more about, it can be very individual, but it really is about others.
No, it is. And I think, and again, family too, right? And like, I think
Right.
balancing some of that kind of stuff in relationships, right? Because I think that's I'll say the more emphasis. You might, have all these sporting records or be in some Hall of Fame somewhere, but if your family's like, that doesn't mean anything because he was never there for us, then the family's not promoting it. The family's not involved in it. And I think if you think about, some of the, it just even from athletes standpoint, Hall of Famers or things like that, the ones you probably, talk about or we hear about the most and stuff like that, not only had, big time accomplishments in the sporting world, but there's almost always something else. Like whether it was family or a charity that they worked with, or their family keeping their legacy going on what they cared about, or starting a foundation in their honor because this is what they really cared about. Like those are the people, even in the sports world, that don't just collect dust in a Hall of Fame, are always trotted out. Names are always remembered because they're still leveraging the name and their accomplishments to do good today. And I think that's an important piece of it too, as opposed to, great, I did all these things at a point in time. That's over in bronze somewhere, and does it mean anything after that moment? Probably not.
Or the buy-in. Do you have the buy-in of others to pursue something that you are really good at? And I think, like in the American Legion, whenever you get a whole bunch of different people together, sometimes people will bubble up to the surface that are really good at what you're doing. And then you have the opportunity, am I going to support, or am I going to fight against?
Yeah. I think in any organization, right? Like no one does anything on their own, right? Like you need to have the full support of whatever your group is, post, district, department, anything. And not only just that, but then like I would say like the rest of the family too, even within the Legion, right? Like, are you supported by your auxiliary units? Or are you supported by your Sons of the American Legion squadrons and whatnot? Like, do you have that full? Because then really, it's the whole, if you want to go someplace fast, go by yourself. You want to go far, you go with a big group, right? Like, how do you pull people behind you and have that whole family supporting you to do those things longer lasting or bigger impacts for the organization?
The bigger impact. So organizationally, the legacy of an organization really requires us to really serve the organization more than serve self. And I really like the fact that the American Legion to me is probably the most democratic organization I've come across, in that your personality and your character is evident to everyone. And if they don't support you, you're not really going anywhere.
Yep.
And so somehow those values are the things that will put you forward if they see you have potential, and then they have to choose to support you.
Yeah. And it's obviously different at every, again, that's the
Yep.
other thing is it's different at every level, right? Because, but to your point,
Mm-hmm.
the people make up the post, the district, the department, and they're all going to be different depending upon where area of the country you are and stuff like that, and what they're
Oh,
thinking
that's
and
true.
how that's going to go is. But,
Yeah.
it's still that, like, it's what's important to that community is what's going to get you to be able to progress or do things in that particular post. And then that may be different if as you're
Yeah.
going to a district level or a larger part or to a department level where you're now having to think about a lot bigger scale or a lot bigger scope of what's important to the organization than maybe just in your little local post or community. And I think that's that
Yeah.
evolution understanding. If you try to do that with I've got it all figured out and it's just one way and this is what it is and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, or I can do this all by myself, um, you're not going to go far because you have to, just like you built that, I'll say connection or that support network or
Mm-hmm.
those supporters within your own post. Every time you go to a bigger section, you got to do the same thing all over again,
All
uh,
over again.
with a different group of people. And some of the learnings may be good, and what worked for you at the post level might work for you at district or department or whatever else,
Right.
and some of it won't because it's just a different level of thinking, or
Yep.
just lifting it up to the next level to say what makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's not always easy for everybody. But the more people you have supporting you, the easier that becomes because you get as well so many different points of views and so many varying different options on doing stuff that then you can look through and say like, okay, well, what's the right tactic or right approach for this particular situation
Mm-hmm.
because I've been open and I have all these people, or you have that network that you can go call and say, I have no idea how to handle this. Like, what would you do? Right? Like, those are the
Right.
important pieces too.
Yeah. The American Legion in, is it 2020, created a mission statement?
Yeah, so
Is
there was a bit of a there was a 21st century committee that talks about it, and like the first
Mhm.
component of that is legacy and vision, and that was really around the 100th anniversary,
Yeah.
and really saying how do we take all the great 100-year legacy that we have, and how do we
Mhm.
turn that into a vision for the next 100 years of service. And there's a lot of those kind of things, and that's components around some of the things that you're talking about: mentorship. How do you pass those
Mhm.
things on? How do you make sure those same core values, those same core things are carried on into the future? Understanding they're going to be carried on in a different way. We live in a different world.
Yeah.
Although there were a lot of parallels around the 100th birthday from kind of a global war, a global pandemic, all in that kind
Mhm.
of same window, the same as there was in World War I and in 1919, and then having all that
Right.
kind of stuff happen again. There were some really eerie parallels around that and around the 100th, but how we operate just as a world is different.
Yep.
But the cool thing about the Legion and things is, like, again, those four pillars, the things that are important, the core values still are needed and still maintained today. They're just operated and executed in a little different way now
Yep.
because of all the different the way communities have changed, the way technology has changed, the way
Mhm.
people move, can move
Mhm.
around the country so much more freely, or all those different kind of things
Yep.
that change how you have to work with
Yeah.
stuff, and how you
Yep.
have to try to accomplish the same mission from 100 years ago in a new way. And that was recommendations and things that we were trying to put forward through that a lot. And part of that
Mhm.
is encapsulating some of that into like a mission statement, a vision statement, and
Mhm.
value statements that most people would be familiar with from whatever their branch of service was, right? You're kind of
Yep.
so that was something that we tried to adopt to say, okay, how do we take these things from the last 100 years and kind of make sure we're putting those into a mission statement that will apply for the next potentially 100? And
Yeah.
what are the values that were important then that are still important now, and how do we need to reflect them, and how do we need to drive them from now? And then what's ultimately is our vision to carry on the legacy for the next 100 years? How do we go about that?
Because the legacy in an organization is present and ongoing, and it's always front and center. I mean, individually, you might developmentally be starting to think about your legacy when you're older, but the American Legion's legacy is something that it, which is living and breathing only because of the human beings, but is always front and center. We're
Yeah.
always thinking about how we impact others and what do we want to do for them, right?
Yeah, and I think sometimes
Yeah.
it's like you don't have to leave it all behind, right? And that's where I go back to like
Yeah.
you can change things and you can do things in a new way, but you're
Hmm.
not leaving it all behind. It's not that anything that was done over
No.
the last 100 years was bad, wrong,
Yeah.
or whatever, any of that kind of stuff. It's all good. It's how do we do it better? And how do we do it better to be more impactful and more relevant for the time we live in and the times we will live in going forward? And that's where
Mhm.
you probably had heard me. I think I mentioned it in both at that in class, but in a couple different forums too, where I took a little bit about like, like pride, purpose, and passion, right? Like
Mm.
how you need to have that pride for what the organization has done in the past, and then
Mhm.
a purpose. And this gets a little bit more down to an individual perspective on how you look at it too. But have pride in the organization you belong to and what it's done in the past, and maybe what you've been involved in the past as well. Have a purpose for what you're trying to do going forward, and then be passionate about it. And if you bring those three things to stuff, then you're going to get people that are going to want to support you. You're going to get people
Yeah.
that are going to want to work through things like that because you bring those things to the table. And you're able to keep the ball moving, and you're able to keep things, programs and legacies alive, and maybe even start some new ones that need to be done
Mhm.
in a new way for what
Mhm.
your particular community needs.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the legacy piece for the American Legion is part of all the conversations. It never stops being a part of. Like, to me, it seems like the American Legion's legacy is their mission statement, which is the preamble. Well, different than how do you
Yeah,
encapsulate that for everybody?
I think, and I look at the preamble like a little bit differently, because I think
Hmm.
that from my perspective, it's a great reminder for why we were formed and why we're still here. I don't
Yep.
know as though I view it as a mission or a vision statement, and I think I
Right.
think where that still be 100% relevant is, and again, I think posts and other places that don't use that at their opening are making a mistake, because and especially I've been to some posts where they have like they might be having a tough meeting or a tough decision to make, and they're like, well, we're just going to skip all the opening stuff, get right to it. And I'm always like, no, 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 no.
Stop.
Like, that opening and that understanding sets the tone for why you're here and what the grander purpose of the organization is, so that you
Yep.
can then have difficult conversations and still ground yourself back in, we're gathered
Hmm.
here for the following purposes, right? Like, we're
Hmm.
not here to for picking on people or to try to do anything. Like, we're
Hmm.
here for the betterment of the larger organization. If it doesn't fit into one of those things, we should probably look at it a little bit differently. um
Yeah.
but again, it evolves over time. If I think about part of our missions and stuff like that has always been, what are some of the biggest crises or other things that have happened in our country. And throughout our history, the organization has a history of stepping up for things that are needed in any given time. And it's no different than what we're doing now with like Be the One and things like that as well. It's like you have a crisis going on, and so
Hmm.
how do we develop a program and things like that that's new. But the bottom line is that, like, standing up a program or something like that based on what's needed in the country at a time is nothing new for our organization. This just
Yeah.
happens to be the one we're doing right now, and
Yep.
because that's what's needed in our larger national community and veteran community and things like that. That's what you push and you drive for. When they started,
Hmm.
the children and youth programs, originally, that was to respond to a crisis of not having enough young people that could serve and defend our country in another global war, right? Like, so
Hmm.
there are things change on why you do it, but our organization always has that history of
Yep.
responding to a crisis with programs that can then hopefully maintain those things for a
Hmm.
long period of time and correct some of those, not just veteran and military or national, but societal issues as well.
Yeah. So legacy is the what and then the how. Because the what hasn't necessarily changed.
Right.
The how we are doing the what's. So the American Legion's legacy has always been the well-being of the
Of
family
yeah,
and
veterans and
veterans
their family, right? Like,
and veterans and their families.
and by extension, the whole thing. I mean, even the new tagline, right? Like, veterans strengthening America, that got launched, that you'll see everywhere like that. Like,
Okay.
yeah, that was launched and new in the new 100 years, but that is literally from writings of the founders.
Mm.
Like, so we pulled that out of writings from the founders and saying, like, yeah, that was a reemphasizing, we're still doing the same thing they were thinking about then, which
Yeah.
is trying to build a stronger country, through our organization. And the other component to that was too is that we're one of the few veterans organization that doesn't actually have veterans in its name. And so that causes confusion and branding sometimes. So if you have a tagline that goes with the stuff, to say, hey, we're veterans strengthening America, and it makes it very simple to have a quick, concise, consistent message. So when people ask, well, what's the American Legion? The simple answer is veterans. It's a bunch of veterans strengthening the country, or veterans strengthening America, right? It's a really short response that can sometimes get people thinking, and then open the door for further communication about the pillars or the programs of the organization too. But it's really kind of intended to be that tagline to pull people in to understand who we are and what we do on a super large scale.
Yeah. You not only serve your post in the American Legion, but you're also at the national level. I don't think we pulled that out of your bio.
That's all right.
Can you tell me or tell us on national where you are?
Yeah, so obviously I'm I'm a past post commander at my post, at my particular post, that provides you some rights and things like that. So I do try to stay and advise and be there for all of the current officers at my post, and anything that they need from that perspective. Same thing at a department level. As a past department commander, we have certain kind of rights and stuff like that in our DEC and things like that. And then it's really out finding and helping and curating and mentoring that next group who are going to be department commanders in 3, 4, 5 years, and showing them the path, or working with our Department Legion College to help get them there from that perspective. And then I'm the alternate NEC for Maine, and on a national level, I'm currently serving as the membership and post activities chair for the national organization. So that's where all of our membership programs, membership awards come out of. We're also have taken on the committee has taken on kind of the mandate as well as to be the champions for the 21st Century Committee, because so many things around that 21st Century report, are around membership and training, and then legacy and vision. And so many of those things fall under, the membership and post activities area, that we're then able to help drive those, help support the departments and posts and districts and how to implement those, or give them ideas, or share best practices across. So we really try to work with those, and each member of the committee has a couple departments that they're kind of responsible to liaison with and help and support and see what they need, and make sure they're driving that, I'll say, volunteer side support as well. Because in addition, there's obviously our awesome staff liaisons for the different regions from membership coordination perspective as well, that can help on the everyday or the system things and stuff like that from the staff side. But we also have this group on the membership post activities that can really help with a lot of great experience and ideas from other departments on how they've seen membership and post activities go and do over time, and what's been working well, and to share with the departments that they support.
Thank you, because you were talking like you had been involved in the 21st Century Report, and I'm like, I don't think our listeners actually know like your level of involvement.
Well, on that, I talk about that too, because like I was fortunate enough to serve on that 21st Century Committee, that the second one that pretty much amplified the original one that was done in 97, and then added some different components to it that were more relevant to now. So the original one was in 97. This one was the committee was in 2017. And unfortunately, we're really just getting a chance to push and put it out right now, because we kind of got interrupted by the pandemic a little bit. So the committee's report and recommendations, were approved in October of 2019 at the NEC at the fall meetings. And so, in DC at the Washington conference, we were kind of getting ready to roll out and start pushing, the mission, vision, values statements, and a lot of different recommendations out of that in preparation for the spring meetings in May. And as we all tried to get out of DC, the world shut down. And so we lost a lot of momentum with that. And so I think last year and the year before, we've been trying to find the way to get that back in as we're coming back out of COVID, as we're coming back out of people getting, back into some sense of normalcy within the organization working. And this year, I think it's really picking up steam for a number of reasons. One, our commander was the chair of that committee, and so he's not going to let it go. So Commander Seehafer is out talking about it, and so many of the things that he talks about, align with that. And you had mentioned earlier when we were talking about even the leadership, but like the servant
Yeah.
leadership style that
Yeah.
is so needed in an organization like ours today, that he's out, really advocating for and pushing for, that hopefully is a start of, a seed of change throughout the whole organization to think about things differently, both from a leadership perspective,
Yeah.
but then also tactically and how we go after and how we engage and do that stuff. And I hope people are seeing things in that report that are happening at the national level, whether that's
Change.
sponsorship, whether that's finding the right purpose and program with Be the One, whether it's how we, advertise, how we communicate, how we provide material and stuff like that for posts to leverage that may not be able to afford. There are things like a lot of these different kind of things, where bits and pieces of recommendations around some of this stuff that we're starting to get going. And so now it's really making sure that everybody has access and awareness of all of this stuff, all the way down to every post level, so that they have everything they could use as collateral to adjust and map to do what's right for their own post and community.
Yeah. 4.5 years is a long time to wait, especially when it's something so instrumentally integral to the legacy of the American Legion. So for all the committee members that were on that, I mean, it's just like biting your nails. Like, we have something and we work together on it. We dug far back into the beginning. We're just continuing. So kudos to you on, I don't know how you practiced your patience.
I don't think, well, yeah, I don't think we had a choice, right? I think the one thing is, and that was one of the first recommendations coming out of the gate is like the 97 one sat on the shelf. And that was this cannot sit on the shelf, right? Like we need to find a plan for that. And, we were working towards a plan of how we were going to put it out. And then just like everything else, everything stopped. Right.
Right.
And then it was even coming out of the pandemic. I'm just happy we're bringing it back now, because I think initially, trying to pull out of the pandemic, I don't know if that was the right time for a serious amount of change.
Right.
At the time, I think it's more about like getting people back out to do anything. After I think people were, either frustrated or afraid or whatever the individual's case may be, or worry about liability issues or whatever it is, to get back out in their community to do those different kind of things. And I think just getting back to just the very, very basics of places being open and meeting again and whatever else, you need to build that foundation first. Because I think otherwise the potential is if you try to slam a whole bunch of changes down to people after they hadn't been doing anything for 2 years, you may have had the chance that people just said, well, no, I'm not doing all this new stuff, and now's the time for me to walk away. So I think over from a change management perspective, like we're doing the best we can to try to build back from the ground up. But now that we're starting to see, at least from my perspective, participation coming back and building coming out of the pandemic, now's the time where you're starting to get energy and you need to go to the next thing. That's where all these ideas and things like that can come out of, is that, all right, what do we do next? Okay, we're out of here. How do we build? How do we take this to the next level? And that's that opportunity where you hopefully have a bunch of people that are looking for stuff to go do or are energized to go do. And then you can hand them the information report and stuff out of this report to give them, hey, these were recommendations that were approved and signed off. Let's go. And I hope and feel like that's probably where we are right now. And we just need to continue to be putting those things out and pushing them as much as we can.
Yeah, I've noticed just in Minnesota, because I'm in Minnesota, the tempo has changed, because COVID was really crisis.
Yeah.
And we don't have any headspace. We're just trying to survive and keep the toilet paper in our houses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so knowing when you can intervene and introduce something that is going to require a behavioral change to some degree. And so I think it's a different day. It's a new day. And we've, the legislative side of the House is a little bit more active. And so I've been thankful of the American Legion's thrust. I love the new mission statement. Do you know it by heart?
No, not yet.
Me neither. I was trying to remember. It's like, I know it starts with the well-being for veterans and family. And it really just encapsulates the 4 pillars, and it encapsulates everything. And it's very clear and concise, and this is our legacy that we will commit ourselves to do. And the legacy piece is really, to me, an opportunity to the investment in that selfless service piece. Yeah, it's just choosing
Sometimes
to do it.
I think we might be lucky too, because sometimes, like, it's really nice when some of the change kind of happens organically, right? Like, and that's right when you say you see the different level of enthusiasm or op tempo when people are coming out looking for the next thing to do, and then taking advantage of those opportunities. Like, hey, we've had this thing that's been sitting around for a couple of years, maybe we can go after that. And so when things like that kind of happen organically a little bit more, as opposed to really trying to like force something down or those kind of things, it makes it that much easier, and hopefully people encourages adoption and drive from that kind of stuff. And then hopefully it ticks and ties, right? Like, and again, if you really want to think back of it, is that, this whole organization was created during a pandemic, right? So the least we can do is continue it on and make it and grow it coming out of that. If they had the ability back then, without all the tools that we have today, to build and grow an organization that big, that quickly, in the middle of a pandemic, I should hope we should be able to come back and do some good things and evolve the organization coming out of the pandemic as well.
So the legacy piece of the American Legion, that when they were creating it back in 1918, was to take the macro view, like recognizing we're all individually have our ideas of where we want to go, and individually and personally what we want, what we need. But then they had the ability of saying, okay, there's no rank, there's no structure. Each man and woman stands on their own 2 feet and their own abilities, and we're going to do this together. Took all of those individual sufferings and harnessed them into this vision. And I think that's another great piece of the legacy for the American Legion, is you have the ability to harness, but you have to choose to be harnessed for the greater good, and you're going to benefit from it. Everyone's going to benefit from it. It's just not you getting kudos. It's everybody.
Yeah. And that goes back to the purpose, right? I think, like, if you can feel good about making a much larger impact than, the pat on the back or the, a little pin to put on your thing or whatever. No, you're like you're really helping make a real impact, in your local community, in your state, and in some cases, the larger country as a whole. Like, those things are, from my perspective, way more impactful, and you can feel a lot better about them than some of the other individual accomplishments, things that you could ever possibly do on your own.
You just have to choose to say, okay, the American Legion's mission is my mission. You have to passional purpose, or no, I have a mission to accomplish in the American Legion.
That's it. And it may be one of those things, right? Like, maybe it's this one thing that you're really passionate about, and that's the thing, and that's your legacy. Or maybe it's something you're super passionate about that maybe there isn't a program for right now. So maybe you need to start one, right? And then you can build that. And that's, I think, the cool thing and the flexibility around, our organization, the ability to just start things and do things differently that potentially, have the ability to grow into department-wide programs, nationwide programs, as has been shown in the past. I'm sure the people that started, Oratorical or some of these other ones were thinking more about the impact they needed to have locally than the fact that it would be a national program still going on however many years later, right? So those are the different things to think about. Like, I think, it's that whole kind of think global, act local type of thing. And it's like, hey, if it's needed here, it's probably needed somewhere else. So start out here, see how it goes, fine tune it, and you'll have other people banging down your door to say, how did you do that? And can I borrow that? Yes. And that is going to help my community as well. And that's how those things tend to spread and really work.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, Matt. It's almost 50 minutes. I figured we would be able to continue on. Do you have any parting words that you would like to share in regards to this conversation?
No, I the only thing I would just remind people too is I just be conscious of it. Like, if you haven't been really conscious of what your legacy has been to this point, in the organization, in your community, or anything else, like, try to start to be thoughtful about it a little bit, and then understand whether it's what you would like it to be, and if it is or isn't, how would you think about changing it? And some of
Yeah.
that kind of introspection and things like that are really the key things there, so that you're not surprised down the road by what it may or may not be in the future. So just keep
Right.
those things in mind.
Thank you.